Hi everyone and welcome to the BeJS Podcast. I'm Elian. I'm a software engineer working in open source. I'm in the core team of Astro. I love Belgium, I love beer, and I'm here with Aymen. Aymen, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Aymen. I'm the founder of BeJS. I'm a front-end developer based in Brussels. And I also like beer, like a lot.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Cheers. Of course, it's not just us two. We also have a guest with us. Aymen, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, so today we are happy to have Ujjwal with us, which is the co-chair of the TC39, and I will let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Aymen and Elian, for introducing me. I'm Ujjwal. I work on compilers and programming languages, mostly around web standards in Igalia. Also sort of currently co-chairing TC39 and co-editing a document that does part of the API. So yeah, I love to sort of work on different sides of programming language design, and I love to talk about these at conferences and podcasts like yours, so it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for being here. First of all, you started with TC39. For people that never heard of something like that, what is TC39?
Yeah, that's one of the more descriptive names that we use, right? TC39 is, a technical committee of ECMA International. That's a standards body for European computer manufacturers. Sort of started doing different computer standards, right? Like CDs and stuff. And now here we are with the web. So, in ECMA, there's these committees that design programming languages, including TC39, that specifically oversees JavaScript. So the JavaScript language, all of semantics, the syntactic sort of details around the language, how the different API functions behave, and also ultimately test suites, right? So to make sure that every browser, every other JavaScript engine is compatible with each other is an important work of the committee.
Right. Yeah, that sounds amazing. And also you work at a company called Igalia? And how does that relate to TC39?
Yeah, so Igalia is an open source consultancy. I am really glad you mentioned your open source background. So we're all sort of hype men for open source, right? Like
definitely.
I personally love so many different open source communities, especially around JavaScript. What Igalia does is specifically consult with various organizations on different open source projects, and in our case, in the case of our team, working on JavaScript and WebAssembly and all these different programming language environments and standards. So yeah, there's a lot of feature work to be done on various open source projects like the kernel, or say the JavaScript spec in my case, or V8, Chrome, all of these projects. And Igalia tries to essentially provide a home for engineers like me to work on these projects without having to care about the different trappings that come with open source, right? Worrying about setting your own channels of remuneration or working at different companies. Instead, you can just hang around with other consultants, and that's one of the fun aspects of it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, sounds really fun.
Yeah, you talked about the TC39, but can you tell us a bit more about how it works? Who are the people that are involved with the TC39, etc.?
Definitely. Like TC39 by itself is just referring to a specific standards group, right? So it's a formal committee. There's obviously, like, as you mentioned, I'm a co-chair. There's a group of elected chairpersons. There's documents that they produce, which are produced by editors mostly. But on the whole, the actual day-to-day technical work of TC39 is done by just the group of people who are involved in this. So there's different delegates for different companies. You can have browser vendors like Google, Mozilla, Apple, and so on. And also like all sorts of different stakeholders, right? You have Bloomberg on the committee, you have Salesforce on the committee, and so on. So different subject area experts, different delegates for various sort of stakeholders in the web at large come together in this singular venue. It could be the GitHub organization, could be one of the meetings to discuss the future of our programming language. One of the most important aspects of the web at large, but especially JavaScript, is that everything needs to be done in a way that doesn't break the web, most importantly, and also in a way that is agreeable to the largest set of people who are responsible for working on this and with this language, right? So that has to take into account engine developers, sort of academics or programming language researchers who are interested in the various aspects of how to develop this kind of, because think about this, like we are all also JavaScript developers at large, right? And we are part of this huge social experiment of this shared language that has to work across communities, across different groups of people, and across everything. These days, I think it's hard to find any class of software that doesn't have any bit of JavaScript involved. So to essentially make sure that everybody has a say in the process, the committee has various meetings. We have GitHub, as I mentioned, is where most of the actual work goes on. So yeah, basically everybody who's contributing on GitHub at large, and then more specifically, the smaller set of people who attend meetings form the main sort of core of TC39.
Wow.
Wow.
I think that's
Awesome.
yeah, that's a lot. So it basically means that if I want to add something to JavaScript, as in the language, I would come to you and propose something. How does that work? Like, I have an idea. Where do I start?
Well, there's really a lot of ways where you can start. So essentially, every big change in the JavaScript language goes through a special process. We call it the stage process of TC39. It's something that we're actively changing over the course of time as requirements develop. But essentially, it is a stage process that goes through various stages of a proposal. Make sure that we don't skip anything, or like, there's nothing that we've overlooked, so to say. There's a lot of review involved in the various stages. And to kick off any of these proposals, essentially what you need to do is just write a document, right? You have to write some explainers, some different sort of ideas that people could think about. So to start, and the most important aspect, I feel, of any proposal, to start a proposal, may it be in the form of a blog post or just a document that you've written down by your hand, is a problem statement. Like, that's the most important thing. In TC39, we actively actually try to discourage people from thinking about solutions before problems. The first stage of the process, therefore, is only about the problem. Because you see, like, when the definition of anything going from stage 0 to stage 1 is not in any way talking about any solution at all, but instead acknowledging that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. So, for example, there may be certain proposals that you can think about where it's very like aimed towards a very specific solution. I can assure you that this is sort of either discouraged or is already not the case, where most ideas in TC39 actually start out as a problem that needs to be solved in the language or in the way people write JavaScript, right? So that's the absolute basic. After that, after you've reached first stage, for which, like, to formally reach that, you would need to then actually see, like, who's on this committee. One of the delegates could actually champion your proposal to take it there. It's we can later talk about the various ways you can find out who's on the committee and talk to people. But basically, once you've reached there, you can start talking about solutions. You can talk about possible solutions, their implications in terms of like runtime cost, about the semantics that they would have. Now at stage one, you start ideating about what a solution could look like. But still, it doesn't need to have a really like finalized solution, if you will. It just needs to have the shape of a solution at which the committee would say, hey, like this is starting to look good. It looks like you're covering your bases. You have some solutions in mind. And with that, it enters stage two. And then at stage two, you have to like really come down. You have to select one solution and really flesh out exactly how it works, exactly how everything behaves, at what point it sort of gets finally reviewed, like for a feature, right? And then considered at stage three, at which it starts getting implemented in various browsers and engines and tools like Babel if they need to. And then after the stage three is complete, like you get all sorts of feedback from users, from people implementing, everything is green. It's finally like added to the spec. So now it's part of the programming language in general.
Wow.
Awesome. That's a lot of stages to just
we're introducing a new one actually in between. It's
okay.
It's gonna be fun. We just finished a meeting actually last week, and one of the discussions was about some of the problems that we have encountered throughout our course of work using these stages, right? Temporal, for example, is a proposal we were just chatting about. It's one of the largest changes, single big changes to the JavaScript language and additions to the JavaScript language. Yeah, it's the biggest change in general since ES6, I hear. It's definitely the biggest proposal. So a lot of the challenges, logistical challenges, as well as like social or I don't know, like challenges in terms of complexity were introduced by Temporal that we hadn't thought about. So people are now adding a new stage to the TC39 process that would actually separate out some of the existing second stage. So the testing, for example, will now be done. Like I skipped that part, I guess, during my whole spiel. But in there, obviously, there's a part at which you have to write detailed tests to make sure that the people who are actually implementing this in various engines can actually test their implementation, right? So there's all these different phases that need to be actually gone through in order to actually introduce a feature, because otherwise we risk deviating away from each other.
Wow, of course. Yeah, I mean, like the process of doing the stages and such is very comparable to like what we do at Astro. I don't know if you ever saw what we do, but we also have an open roadmap, and it's very, very like kind of the same attitude. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, definitely. I think I have seen firsthand how useful this kind of process is, because it gives a lot of different points at which people can review things. I feel that in many organizations where I've worked without like a structured process like this, things can sometimes like slip under the radar, can go past without sort of getting the kind of eyeballs it needs. Whereas in this kind of a sort of stage process or a step process, you get to think about it in different terms throughout the different stages, right? So it really forces you to think in different aspects also about a certain thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think it gives yourself, like if I was to propose something and it goes to stage one, you start thinking about other stuff and you start adding and you start thinking and you start, like your proposal gets way better over time. And because of that stage system just takes some time to implement. I think it's a really good thing to do. And I also think that actually more open source projects should like handle that system.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, I mean, obviously your mileage may vary depending on the size of your project. Astro is a big one, but then like maybe for a smaller project, it's too tedious to go through such a large process, right? And I feel that one of the biggest things that software projects in general have that we do not have the ability to actually make breaking changes, right? Even if you decide to make a sort of substantial change and everybody agrees throughout the process, at least you have the ability of making a new major release and sort of breaking some things. Whereas in JavaScript, you just do not have that ability. You have to keep supporting all the legacy stuff.
That is true. How do you handle that? Is it just by doing a lot of tests?
Among other things, I mean, there's still so many inconsistencies because obviously, like the programming language and the development process of it has become more structured and more stricter over time, right? So there's obviously a lot of the legacy existing sort of pathways that are not even good enough to be tested for because they're just so wildly inconsistent. But we try our best. I mean, over time, people have have basically evolved their understanding of the language as well, right? I mean, the JavaScript I feel that we write these days with the advent of, say, async await or a lot of these new features, arrow functions are an old one, but still classes and decorators is just so different from JavaScript people used to write, right? There's when was the last time you used Proto, for example?
I don't think Elian remembers that.
Nope.
You're lucky in that way, then. But I feel that there's all these sides to the language that we've grown past, but we cannot grow out of completely because we have to continue supporting it. I mean, even talking about temporal, the funniest thing for me would be that date would remain forever, right? And the fact that maybe, just maybe, unless we put like huge banners saying about like how you should not use this API on MDN or something, some future developers will just stumble across date and they'd be like, wait, what is this? Maybe I should try it out. I don't know how well we can communicate to people that they should not be using this API, for example, but it's a challenge to not be able to unship.
And is that the reason, like, so something that I learned is that, for example, null is a type in JavaScript, right? But if you make a type of null in JavaScript, it gives you object. And do you know what's the reason behind this kind of bug? Because it should be null as it's a type, right?
Well, yeah, type of null is object. I mean, that's one of the classic things in which like JavaScript had a very specific design when it was designed and like with a very specific way of like how the type system would work and how people would write code, right? Like also what kind of programs would people write. That has vastly changed over the life cycle of JavaScript now. Obviously, some of the semantics like type of null would never be able to be changed because there are some websites that would always inevitably depend on it. But that doesn't mean that like these aren't like legacy aspects of our language that really don't make sense anymore. I mean, that's the whole pain. I feel like it's just a language that has to evolve with the pace of time, right? I mean, I think JavaScript of all languages has no options. JavaScript, in terms of the ecosystem, right? Like different tools and platforms are evolving so fast that JavaScript has basically no option than to evolve fast to accommodate that or risk being given up on by the community, right? People are eventually going to get frustrated of the language not evolving. However, the language that is essentially being forced to evolve the fastest doesn't have the ability to actually deprecate any parts of itself. So obviously the complexity over time just goes on increasing. I think we've seen this happen a few times over with certain programming languages and projects, but I think it's certainly interesting just to see it happen with JavaScript in real time, right? Like it's evolving in front of us in real time, and yet it has a lot of these things holding it back. It's a fun puzzle to solve, I think.
Yeah, I can see definitely like you have to think about so much stuff if you can't deprecate something. You have to be really like do your thorough research into a feature, into an API, if it will work. And of course, the probably one of the hardest things is also like you implement it in the language, but then you're even more dependent on browsers and browser companies to also implement it into the browser and to support features like that. How do you like... I want to say, like, how do you tell them what they have to build or what they have to do next?
I think the best part about TC39 is this sort of process that we take in terms of both consensus. All the browser vendors obviously are an integral part of every single discussion that we have.
Yeah.
And also just our politics in the sense of, being consistent about things, being more vocal and all at the same time being very conservative about things that we push through in the end. I think because of this, it's quite obvious and understood like what needs to be done at whatever point. Browser engineers are, as it turns out, even better than us at tracking stuff. So they continue tracking all the different things that we do in the committee on their respective bug trackers and so on, include them in their roadmaps and such. But yeah, there is definitely no like enforcing power, if you will, in TC39. We can't make somebody implement anything, which is why, if you think about it diplomatically or politically, it becomes such an intriguing project and an interesting project, right? Like we need people, very big and very diverse set of people to not only agree about all the things, more or less, right? I mean, obviously, there's no total consensus ever, but also like be included enough in the whole process to be able to push through these different things. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just the implementers. I mean, there's editors, implementations, obviously, need a lot of work, a lot of time, but all the different aspects, the testing of different proposals, all of these require different people to actually take charge because, as it is, the committee doesn't actually have the ability to go up to somebody and say, hey, can you please do this? So, yeah, it's a social challenge to, make the game theory somehow work so that everybody more or less does what they need to do at the time that it's supposed to be done.
Actually, that brings me kind of a question, like how is the committee sponsored, or maybe not sponsored, but
Funded,
kind of funded? Yeah.
Yeah. The members, which are basically like member companies to ECMA, pay like yearly ECMA dues. So basically, like if you wanted to join the committee as a delegate at the moment, you would need to join ECMA as an organization. So based on the size of your organization, various different member organizations pay some yearly dues to ECMA that it then like sort of fuels into these different committees, including TC39, which is like the most sort of big or like in scope of work, as well as in terms of like driving membership as well as work, the committee of ECMA. But there's other committees, obviously, like TC53 and so on, that also do much interesting work. Like you could check them out. However, that is obviously just a part of the operational expenses. That includes things such as the organizational structure and the secretaries that we have, or the transcription service, for example, that we've started using recently. But still, like the meetings itself need to be hosted by hosts. So different member organizations can host certain meetings. For example, the next year we have 3 scheduled meetings, one like with different organizations, basically. So essentially, what you can do is, as a conference or as an organization, you can pitch in and say, "Hey, I can host a TC39 meeting." and basically everybody travels through their own expenses. So it's sort of split at the end of the day how the actual sort of funds of the operations come from, right? The logistical operations are taken care of by ECMA, and then each individual member also is like funding sort of their employees to work, to travel, and so on.
Are the meetings that you do in person or are they just online?
Yeah, the at the moment, because COVID happened and everything was sort of shifted up, and then eventually like we had to switch back and forth. So at the moment we have 6 total meetings every 2 months. 3 of these meetings are currently offline, or like hybrid, right? With online sort of membership, but then it's actually hosted in a certain place. So at the moment we're doing one in Asia, one in Europe, and one in America. But yeah, it's difficult. Obviously, like the membership of the committee is skewed towards the American time zones. So the online meetings are more heavily skewed towards the US. But like we still try to have a more sort of split set of venues, as well as just be more inclusive in terms of times and so on. But yeah, at the moment there's 3 in-person meetings every year.
Yeah. How many people are actually on the committee?
That's a great question. I have no like accurate idea. I think if you observe the meetings, anywhere between 30 to 50 people are active at any given point of time in the meetings. So I would say that there's at least like up to 60 people who are like regularly attending meetings, and then a much bigger set of people when you include people who are mostly active through chat or on GitHub. And then yeah, basically like for example, from my organization, almost all my teammates are registered as delegates. So these are a lot of delegates who don't like regularly attend, but work on various projects that are in some way connected to TC39, and therefore have access to the different documents and such. But yeah, so quite a few.
How does a proposal go from one stage to another? Like, so is that kind of a voting system during the meetings, or how does that work?
That's the thing. Like, yeah, basically it needs to come up during one of the synchronous meetings. Like these are big meetings, by the way. I don't know if I told you, like it's basically during a week, and then there's on the online ones at least there's 5 hours every day for 4 days in a row. So it can overtake your entire week at times. But yeah, different proposals can essentially appear on the agenda for this meeting. There's a agenda cutoff date. Like before then, if you move your agenda item for that particular proposal to the agenda, people would review it and be prepared at the meeting. So during the meeting, you can basically give updates about your proposal, or you can propose different things, including advancement, right? So what you would do is essentially propose advancement during the meeting, and the actual process, instead of going through some sort of voting and simple majority or something like that, we have a consensus process. So instead, what happens is that we ask for votes of support. Those are always nice to hear. And also votes of dissent. But essentially, any sort of dissenting vote counts as essentially a veto or a block to the process, right?
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, you have to try to make sure that every single concern that has been raised to you is addressed in every way, so that nobody feels uncomfortable about the proposal. That is not to say that people are never uncomfortable with any of the proposals that pass. There's many situations where I've heard myself within the meeting, somebody expressing that they dislike certain aspects of a proposal, for example, but would not like to, formally block it because for various reasons, right? Like maybe they feel that they're in the majority, they're in the minority, and that it's fine as long as somebody's being happy with this, or if they feel that there is a lot of demand for something, even though they might not feel that it is justified. So this is a very like personal, sometimes social, democratic, diplomatic thing at the end of the day. But the core idea is that there shouldn't be any stakeholder or any person that has some concern with it that is not addressed, that is essentially overlooked, because that can create sort of an imbalance of power, right? So it's very important, because I feel personally, at least, about how the dynamics can be in terms of like market share, or I don't know, like how certain products think of themselves in terms of the web, that the web needs to stay consistent despite all of that. So it's very important for not only for everybody to be on board at the same time, but also for everybody to have the same say in the process, because even a small sort of disagreement can cause fractures in the web.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, since it's TC39, fractures in the web is a thing that can really happen. That is crazy. Like, you have to be in such a responsible position that must be really hard. And then I have this other question for you is, how did you end up in this position as co-chair of TC39? Where did you start coding, and how did you get all the point to defining the language that you code in?
That is actually a hilarious story. I don't know how long of it
you can go as long as you want.
But yeah, basically, like in terms of programming, I had always had some degree of fascination with computers and software in particular. Also, like growing up, I felt that I had a certain bit of megalomania in me. I looked down on all the software tools I used or games I played, and I was like, okay, I could do a better job than that, obviously. Eventually, by the time I realized that it was difficult to actually program, I was already too deep, so I might as well continue learning, right? So that's how I started learning programming through different sort of aspects. I generally started out making games because that's the only thing I actually wanted to do. But I got frustrated because there's a lot of art involved and like music involved. And I guess I was not that kind of a nerd. So I stuck to programming and moved to the web, which was amazing because a programmer can do anything, right? HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's all I needed and all I could do, to be honest, at the time. And yeah, like eventually I started making better websites, started using more advanced tooling, and participate in more projects, like in open source projects through university groups and so on, until how do I put it? Like I feel that at some point I reached a very weird place, sort of personally, and in terms of like my own development, I started stagnating and thinking like, okay, I can build a website and that's all I need to do, right? So what's wrong with that? But I guess what I was lacking was curiosity and just like sort of drive. So essentially I needed somebody to knock sense into me, and I met a particular like senior from university who knocked some sense into me by saying like, if I start growing like basically stagnant at any level, there's always levels underneath it. I've just not started looking. So this really was a problematic advice. I didn't realize at the time because of what you said. Like I would start digging too deep for my own good. But I started well. I started by working on Node.js. Node was a project that was sort of really important for me to understand like how open source communities work at scale and like how big projects work at scale. By contributing to Node, I really got to know different people of the JavaScript ecosystem, to be at conferences, give presentations about my own work. So that was already exciting to me. But I always felt like, again, like I was just a little bit farther from scratching the surface, right? So I started scratching the surface essentially by digging into V8 and started bothering people all across the internet to teach me how to work on this project. So I bothered a number of V8 engineers who helped me understand the various ins and outs of the engine, and I started working more or less seriously in V8. This was around the time when I was finishing university also, so I really needed to start looking for a job, and I finally managed to sort of get a job working on V8 in Igalia. That was sort of the most amazing parts of my life when I was introduced to TC39. So TC39 was already something that I was starting to become aware of and was always intrigued by this group of people, right? I was by then still focused on the engine and like its various ins and outs, but I was curious about, because of my innate sort of love for JavaScript, right? I feel that a lot of people who are engineers, okay, I don't want to throw shade, but like a lot of people who work day and night on JavaScript in one way or another, especially, for example, working on engines or runtimes, do not necessarily care about the language, which, I mean, to each their own, right? It's fine if you're writing Rust or Zig or C++, and all you care about is systems programming and building this runtime. But you have to think about JavaScript as well, right? Because you're building tools for JavaScript. And I think you need to care about JavaScript in order to be a responsible steward of that programming language. So I was always fascinated by JavaScript because of how accessible I feel that it makes programming. Like after sort of teaching myself JavaScript, I had to also go through 4 years at university where I realized how badly you could teach programming to somebody. Right? And I realized like JavaScript is the best thing for me, or like in the world, because it has made programming accessible for me years before I was supposed to learn programming, and like being a complete idiot, just learning random stuff from the internet. Like if JavaScript can make programming so much easier, and if, as people claim, the goal here is to like make programming accessible to different people, different groups, and in general make programming like one of the core skills, then this is the best way to go, right? Not by sort of doing abstract programming language research, but doing more sort of within the community, digging down of like what people like, what makes things stick, and so on. So yeah, because of this, like in my apparent sort of ability to handle diplomatic situations, some of my colleagues started pushing me more and more towards TC39 work and in general like specifications and so on. And it was obviously very exciting for me to like sort of be at the table, to be involved in. Before I knew, they had completely taken over me, like my work schedule. I was working on TC39 full time, and then eventually, when certain sort of co-chairs who used to be super helpful when I was starting out stepped down, I felt that I had the sort of moral responsibility to take on their work and sort of continue to make this committee a better place to work, because I feel that it's so important for JavaScript developers all across the world that the committee keeps functioning, right? Because a non-functional committee actually makes it worse for everyone. Maybe if your job is to do something repetitive while the committee works, maybe it's not fun. But like for JavaScript practitioners, it's important that we keep working and operating and sort of innovating on new stuff.
And like how did you become like the co-chair? Like, was that kind of an election process, or how does it work?
Yeah, so basically what we do, so there's two things here, right? There's the formal election process, which we need to undertake. The idea is that we have ballots, basically like you present a certain group of people who are all willing to sort of work together as chair people. And then every single member, and in this case, not a delegate, individual member organization, then casts a ballot about who they want in or out, right? Thankfully, because of how social relations are at the moment in TC39, we don't need that all the time. What we do instead is that we collect this list of like individuals who we think are sort of in this willing to work in this position, as well as sort of be palatable to the committee, and then we present it to the committee and actually ask for blocks as well. So the idea is that if the committee can collectively agree for the entire group, then we don't need to actually go down to an election. So so far, like, we have had these unanimous elections, so that's great. I hope at no point in the future will they need to call a proper election and then vote me out. But
maybe.
depends on how I abuse my power. No, trust me, I won't.
Yeah, I remember about that. I remember our first conference, when we did our first conference, Ujjwal was one of the speakers. And he started his talk by saying, I'm the co-chair of the TC39, which means that if I say something that is wrong, you have to take it as something that is true.
Yeah, that's a card that I'm allowed to use, I'm told.
I was on the floor laughing.
I need one of those cards.
Well, we can talk about how you can get involved.
Oh, definitely.
Oh,
definitely.
I'm also interested in getting involved. So, and actually, that's a good question. Like, how can people get involved?
Yeah, so there's really a lot of ways in which you can start getting involved, really. As I mentioned, there's basically all these documents, right, which are the various proposals as well as the big specs. And all of these documents are hosted on GitHub. All of the discussions around them are on GitHub issues. And while we do use a few administrative sort of private repositories, none of the actual technical work of TC39 is in any of these private repositories. So all the technical work, all the proposals are out there in the open. And I think one of the easiest ways to get started is just by going through the GitHub, right? There's maybe some proposals that are ongoing. And if you can find it on GitHub, which I hope you can, we have a website that tries to help you with that. But yeah, there's different ways to find these proposals and essentially just jump into their discussions. But if you look deeper, a lot of these proposals, as well as the administrative work that we do in TC39 or technical work that we do in TC39, requires volunteer effort, right? And a lot of the time it's just the champion who is having some sort of interest in the proposal. But a lot of the time you'll notice that it's just volunteers who don't necessarily care one way or another about the proposals, but are just interested in the technical work. So, for example, every proposal that we put through, if it's an API proposal, it needs a polyfill and or a ponyfill thing. For internationalization proposals, we use Format.js to sort of offload our work of making polyfills onto them, but they do a great work of that. But basically, like, every feature needs to be supported in various places. It could be needed in TypeScript, it could be needed in Babel. Certain proposals regarding modules and their resolution and so on need to be done in different module loaders and bundlers and so on. So Webpack or what have you, like ESBuild. And then apart from that, there's a lot of testing that needs to be done. The test suite that we use is written in JavaScript. Its harness is written in JavaScript. So there's so many projects where you can contribute, either from a language development point of view or from a point of view of like, I want to write JavaScript and build tools and stuff, or add support for just random features, or just render like essentially codified version of these proposals that people can try out. There's playgrounds, for example, like certain proposals you can just go on to a particular website and try them out without actually having to commit anything. So there's these different ways in which anybody could get involved. And obviously, like there's the higher tier in a way, if you will. Like, I mean, in my opinion, there's like no real difference between the different levels of involvement. But if you want to specifically attend the meetings, then you can join as a member, like sort of convince your organization to join as a member and be a delegate. Or in certain cases, if there's some ongoing work that could really use from your expertise and like the champions recognize you as such, you can be onboarded as an invited expert. So there's different ways of getting highly involved or like involved in certain aspects and not the others. But yeah, there's just a wide variety of people who are doing different kinds of work. I mean, for example, some of the implementers on the different sides, right? Like the Firefox side, for example, there's multiple implementers who are not even affiliated with Mozilla. They're just volunteers who want to push more stuff to SpiderMonkey and more love to Firefox.
Yeah, it's very relatable to like how we work in Astro. It's kind of the same. You just get involved, and if you are involved or you show enough effort and you do a lot of stuff, then we invite you to be a maintainer, and from that on you go to being a core maintainer and that system. That's really interesting to see that actually TC39 in a way also like does that.
Yeah, definitely. Like TC39, I feel, especially due to the various stakeholders that are part of it right now and the leadership, I think tries as much as it can not to operate as some sort of standards group like ISO and be very exclusionary, and rather operate as an open source project. Like
exactly
certain administrative parts where maybe like we cannot behave completely like an open source project, but I don't see how it's any different than big open source project like Astro, right?
Yeah.
Like Astro would also have like various logistical aspects that need to be handled sort of outside the public community, but most of the actual work goes on within GitHub and so on, public channels.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And so you're talking about organizations that are members of the TC30 of the ECMA committee or organization, and so are frameworks part of the ECMA organization as well, or do you collaborate with frameworks such as, I don't know, like Next, React, Solid, whatever?
Right. So the answer is that there's various levels to this as well. Now there's obviously, like, for example, Facebook as an organization is a member and therefore has the ability to attend meetings or sort of be a part of essentially every proceeding in the TC39 process, right? So React, for example, being a Facebook project, can have this kind of availability and a sort of access to different things. But like it doesn't matter. Like outside of just organizational setup, we have the OpenJS Foundation. OpenJS Foundation is the one of the non-profit members of ECMA, and it has a number of different JavaScript projects, including, if I'm not wrong, some frameworks. So basically that acts as a way for different people who are involved in these projects to take part in the committee, as well as express themselves. For example, there was a long time when Node was in a position where it didn't have enough influence over the direction of the committee's work. But thanks to OpenJS Foundation being on the board, that is not a concern anymore, because these different projects have representation, right? And they have access to the committee in that way. But also, me and my colleagues, especially my colleagues, let's be honest, I'm not working so hard these days, but Romulo, one of my colleagues, does these standards outreach meetings. So one of these outreach meetings is called the frameworks outreach meeting, and actually like a lot of different people who are involved in different frameworks across the web ecosystem participate in those meetings. And essentially the idea of that meeting is for the organizer, for Romulo, to bring together all these stakeholders, these different framework authors essentially, and a few delegates from TC39. He always tries to like see like which topics are going to be of interest to the framework authors, and then try to create a discussion there, right? So for example, if I'm working on a feature, let's say top level of weight, that could have some implications for your framework, for your tool, we could have like a particular meeting once a month. Let's say it's once a month,
Right.
To talk about it, right? So there's different, and obviously there's the GitHub tracker. So anybody can put comments on the GitHub tracker, and you can say, hey, like this project is actually going to be affected by your change, and you should keep this in mind. So yeah, I think there's various levels at which any framework, for example, can get sort of involved in the process, make sure that there's no kind of feature development that works against their goals or sort of doesn't fit their model of like what they're doing.
Yeah.
Awesome. And my next question is a bit, maybe, I don't know if it's problematic or no, but does the TC39 has some kind of power over the implementers, such as like, I don't know, Chrome, the browsers, whatever?
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand how this could be interesting to think about, but no, that's the most funny, or like from a social point of view, interesting aspect of TC39 is that we always have to make sure that people are in a position are basically being incentivized to do what the committee needs them to do, because we have no power over anyone. So we cannot actually make the implementers do anything, which means that if there is a sort of breakdown of let's say understanding, or breakdown of diplomacy in some way, that could cause the engines to say things like, hey, I just feel like I'm not gonna do this, or not do this in a certain way. So we have to make sure that not only do we continue to do our work, but also that the engines, for example, in this case, incentivize to actually also follow through. So their feedback, for example, is taken very seriously. And when engines, like, as I said, the third stage, one of the most important stages, in my mind at least, is essentially completely dedicated to users and implementers, right? So implementers' feedback during these stages is very important. And so that's one way to make sure that they're getting heard. But I mean, even before they speak their mind out, you have to make sure that they're interested, right? You cannot do things in a way that makes engines uncomfortable with the ideas you're making or the things that you're suggesting. So it's a delicate balance, but we try our best.
All right, and then I still have like one last question. Can you tell us about the TC39 proposals that are open now that you yourself are most excited about?
Definitely. So, well, I mean, I couldn't stop talking about this, but obviously Temporal is the one that excites me the most. In the story, one thing that I didn't mention, maybe on purpose, didn't mention was that the proposal that actually made me switch was Temporal. Temporal at the time was just the biggest thing that was happening in JavaScript in any terms, right? Like in terms of size, in terms of complexity. And obviously, like I talk about it in ways that make it sound already finished, but as we know, it's not completely finished yet. So, but I can say that it's nearly finished on various sides. So Most of
Nice.
the time that is taking now would be, from now on out at least, would be to actually implement it. I think good luck to all the implementers who are working on it now. It's a big change, as I said. It's going to be hard to test, hard to do in various ways, and it just opens up a
Well,
big box.
maybe for
Maybe you
people that
can.
don't know,
Yeah,
can you
exactly.
explain what temporal is? Like in a
Yes.
short.
So Temporal is a project that evolved out of a very simple idea. A simple idea that could, at the time, be summarized in 5 points. So one of the prominent authors of Moment, Maggie, who worked at Microsoft at the time, was obviously upset. And the maintainers of Moment in general were upset because of how things had turned out. And what they had felt was going to be a small band-aid of a project to help JavaScript developers ended up becoming the de facto datetime library for JavaScript, right? Like I can think of people just using Moment out of habit after a point because they knew how terrible date was. And so Maggie, out of frustration, wrote a blog post about the 5 big problems with date. 5 problems that made date completely unusable and what needed to be solved on an urgent basis. So Temporal would go down eventually as one of the most popular in terms of people supporting it, people being in favor of it, proposal in JavaScript. So almost immediately there was a lot of support. The big problem was who's going to do basically this large amount of work, which is to either fix date, which eventually they realized is not going to be possible because you cannot break date, right? So the only way to fix date would be to do it from scratch and then just demotivate people from using the old date. But also over the course of the project, the scope increased and increased and increased, right? So it started with this idea, as I said, of overcoming the shortcomings of date. And then slowly the idea became, well, what would a modern datetime library look like? Because the problem with date, if you don't remember, what's deeply problematic about date is that date, when it was released in 1995, was considered bad 5 years before that. Like it was more than 5 years outdated when at launch. So because it was part of, basically it was copied completely from Java, and then almost nearly instantly Java changed date. So they updated their date. We couldn't forever. And this meant that basically already by 1996 or 7, Java had a better date implementation because they were using a new one. And they went on to update it twice. Like now we have Joda time. So essentially the idea became, what is going to be, like thinking about in terms of 2018, 2019, what is a modern datetime library look like? So they started looking at various different datetime libraries, different tools and techniques that they had learned from Moment, obviously from the JavaScript universe, but also picking up ideas from, say, Luxon, which was sort of their next futuristic idea, right? And also the Rust datetime, like Chrono from Abseil in C++. And so they started formulating these different ideas and really converging on what modern TypeScripty, even because a lot of Microsoft influence and Bloomberg influence, and also just like the idea of like not doing being, because like the problem with datetime arithmetic and types is that the complexity blows up so fast that it's hard to contain it. So the decision to actually stick to discrete types, right, instead of having one temporal type that can be anything, we have on the other hand like date time, and then year, month, Monday, all these different ideas came about, and eventually it became so much more than that, right? By the end, temporal was basically about what can the future of date time look like. So in the end, for example, one of the big things that I'd been working on personally, and I had to essentially put the temporal proposal on hold, or sort of avoid it from being shipping in different browsers was to standardize the new timestamp format that we invented out of scratch. So we had to go on and invent a new timestamp format. As it is, Temporal aims to support almost all third party, or like, let's say, non-Gregorian international calendars that are supported by ICU. So already you have an API that thinks in nanoseconds, that sort of does all these interesting type reflection, as well as supports all international calendars. That's something that really hasn't been discussed before. So I think with that, Temporal eventually became this beast of a proposal it is now. And some people are scared of its size. But I'm happy because I think, yes, if you go by these standards, maybe we don't talk about a date time API again for maybe 20 years at least. So at least for the next 20 years, I'm happy we'll have a decent API that represents the use cases of the present.
Is there any like time framing yet, like when it's will kind of be ready to ship?
I think, as I said, like one of the things that shipping was essentially blogged on was the standards work in IETF about the timestamp. That has been done now. The RFC is being published, but apart from that, it's passed all the approvals process. There's also just the question of implementing it. So it's hard to estimate how long it would take for different engineers and teams to implement it. On the other hand, like we're going through the final stages of like the review and like bug fixing processes on the spec side. So I think I've been wrong on this so many times. Like I keep giving people timelines and it keeps failing. But I think I can say that within the year, Temporal should start shipping in browsers across the world. Yeah, because I think there's so many the last meeting we actually did a survey and a sort of audit of the tests and like the different tests that were running on the engines. And I think it was SpiderMonkey that was passing 70% or more of the tests, and all the other engines were coming in short behind, right? So JSC and V8, and obviously like just the percentage of tests that pass doesn't completely prove anything because we don't test for features specifically. But still, it's a good sort of indication that it's starting to be done, really done in certain engines. If you're a Serenity OS fan, I think you might see it very soon because they've had it implemented for a while and in their libjs engine. So yeah, it's coming along.
So cool. And do you have another proposal that you are excited about?
Definitely. I think finally, after jumping around a bit, as I said, like I was very drawn to Temporal, I have found another proposal that I work on now that I'm similarly drawn to. It's called Intel message format. So it's going to be an internationalization feature. That's how you know that it's closer to my heart. I've just been really focused on the internationalization side of JavaScript recently. And essentially what this is supposed to be is the ultimate sort of Swiss Army knife for internationalization. So if you've noticed over the course of the years, we have added a lot of really useful APIs to internationalization. You have number formatting to format numbers. You have ways to format date times, which is going to include support for all the temporal types as well. So you can format any date times, including old date and temporal. I've been working on duration formatting. There's list formatting. There's all these various things that you can format, right? But at the end of the day, there is another part of localization, of localizing and internationalizing interfaces, especially in terms of big web applications or big interfaces that goes on, which is literal like message translation. So essentially what you have is instead of writing literal text or even code in your interfaces, you usually use a templating language, right? And this templating language might come in with a tool that does message formatting, where essentially you are giving it labels and label text, and it's gonna at production replace labels with specific messages for each locale. So that's the sort of simplest level of this message formatting. Then there's the dynamic aspect that we have had in the JavaScript APIs. So essentially, at the client side, you can further format using these constructors. But there's really so many more things that you could be able to do, but maybe the tooling is not there yet, or these tools are just not completely standardized. So essentially, what we've been doing in Unicode, which is also something that I've been involved in these days, it's basically another standards organization like any other, is standardizing this new thing called message format v2, or the second edition of message format. What this does is it gives you that basic capability of like replacing messages. So if you have a button that says go here or something, you can translate it effectively to any languages. But then it gives you so much more, right? It's basically a programming language at this point. So you have variable replacement where you can say something like hello text label and then username, and it would like actually do the templating. In this case, it's technically templating, right? For you. It would do more complicated things like pattern matching. It can select, for example, based on ordinals, genders, plural selections. So you can have things that are sort of in a more branched structure, if you will, and so much more. Like you can invoke custom functions. So all of these different formatters that we have will actually be available as custom functions. As functions. And you can further provide your own custom formatter functions to this. So essentially it would do everything that templating engines can do at this point and so much more, with a special emphasis on the internationalization aspect, right? So this is going to be a game changer, I feel, for internationalization, because it really standardizes this format, allowing you to use it across different tools. I feel that people use different like framework specific libraries to do this at the moment, and having like not just JavaScript wide, but even an ecosystem wide, thanks to Unicode, right, would allow us to just standardize things, make it easier for translators as well as developers to do this.
Wow, it's actually super interesting. I didn't know about that one. And actually, like, internationalization is something that at Astro we really care about. We have our documentation translated in about 14 languages or something. And that's, I really have to check that proposal out. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad. It's been a little bit on the down low lately. So this is why you might not have heard of it. That's because most of the actual work that has gone on so far has been on the format, right? It's basically a new programming language that has to be designed. Yeah. Like the other day we were talking about if we should allow people to shadow variables or not. So, well, I mean, that's just too complex for a simple programming language. But I feel that because of this, almost all the work that has gone on till now has been in Unicode. But now, like Emily Yarrow, a colleague from Mozilla, is actually starting to really push this in JavaScript in terms of a new sort of API function. So it's going to be really exciting.
Awesome. These look like very life-changing kind of features, I would say.
I hope. I mean, I think that sometimes we can be too conservative, as I've said, in terms of big things, but I think we shouldn't be shy of like adding features at the cost of complexity sometimes, especially when it can really help developers, right? I think it's well understood at this point that the web is at this very pivotal point right now, where the next billion or so users of the web and internet are going to come from all sorts of different backgrounds and languages, and I think the web should be ready to sort of accommodate a lot of this diversity. And like right now, we have, for example, you mentioned, Elian, your documentation site. I think they're really great examples of good internationalization on the web. I feel that corporate websites can sometimes be less friendly or like sort of comprehensive, but they try for various reasons also to be as translatable. But there's certainly a lot of information and knowledge on the web that is trapped behind a certain language in a certain format, right? So anything that we do to sort of make more accessible, the content more accessible would be ultimately better for the next users of the web.
So cool. And so my last question about the TC39 is, are there situations where proposals just don't go the way you would like? How do you kind of decide, okay, maybe that's not a good one, let's start again or change?
Definitely. I think because of just the vast variety and like diversity of the different people who are involved in the process, it's very likely actually, as opposed to the opposite, that somebody is not going to be happy with the proposal, right? So, for example, you have different sort of groups of people. For practitioners, certain aspects of the language are important and others not so much. So it's hard to sort of balance these different groups and their priorities, right? The W3C, for example, has the priority of constituents, where it says whose needs are more important. Are the users more important than the implementers? We don't have a formal document like that. So a lot of this work needs to happen on sort of per case, per individual basis, because it's very important, this social fabric, right? As I said, if the implementers are feeling that their feedback has sort of not been cared about enough, or if the community feels that the language is being controlled by not practitioners, but instead by sort of engine developers, I think any of those would result in a breakdown of diplomacy. So it's very important to keep everybody on board because of this. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think the most important aspect is that we're all here working on essentially the same thing to make a better programming language than yesterday. So I think it's important to focus on the common goal and like work towards that. And yeah, I think you have to understand that at the end of the day, like people are also trying to, because they are also improving language, also trying to get changes in, to get some feedback in. And as long as you're like receptive and you actually put in an effort to like accommodate their feedback and their concerns, everybody is happy.
Awesome. My next question is like the usual questions that we ask at the end of our podcast. And that would be like, are there any technologies in the web or JavaScript in general or libraries that you are most excited about for the future?
Well,
Maybe AI.
Well, I am sorry to say I'm not as excited about AI as I am about certain things on the web.
Same.
Thank you. But yeah, I definitely mentioned a bunch of things in the JavaScript world that I'm excited about. In general, I am very excited about the direction of WebAssembly. I think it's turning out to be a very solid platform. I'm excited about WASM-GC. I know that not everybody is equally happy with the idea of having a garbage controller inside of the WebAssembly implementation. But I think WebAssembly is shaping up to be a very good platform for doing intensive activity, right? I think that one thing that people misunderstand about JavaScript, and JavaScript sometimes pays the price, is that it is an extremely high-level programming language that is designed primarily to design interfaces. And that's why JavaScript is designed in certain ways. And if you try to make it do intense systems work, it would work in certain cases and not in others. And I think Node, for example, is great at that. Like it has made JavaScript pick up a lot of loads where it has realized that, okay, like if you think about certain operations on an operating system, they're not so different from the web because you have a bunch of work happening natively in the background and then you wait for something to happen. And as these events are coming in, so it took this sort of event-driven architecture of JavaScript and applied it to a different platform. It kind of works. But you have to understand that at the same time, JavaScript cannot do everything. It cannot replace a system's programming language and do heavy computation. So I think WebAssembly allows people to more freely like deviate from JavaScript where they need to be in order for them to appreciate JavaScript more. I feel that when you force essentially pliers to punch through a nail, you stop appreciating both hammers and pliers. So I think the different new features in WebAssembly can actually make even JavaScript more enjoyable to write.
Awesome answer. And the next question, I think it's the last one. I'm not sure, maybe Elian, you have a question after that, is like, how do you see web development in 5 years?
Well, I feel that it's so hard. It's so hard to
So hard.
to guess. I mean, everything is old again and then new again, and then like I felt that when I moved
Going
from,
in circles.
yeah, right. Like when I moved away from Ruby on Rails years ago and thought like, oh wow, this Angular thing looks really cool. This React thing is very cool. I never thought that people writing React would come back to the server and like start basically writing Rails apps in React. So it's gonna always surprise me. I feel that I am neither a psychic nor an expert in supernatural incidents to actually judge which direction the web can take as in terms of how technologies go. But I do know for a fact with the direction of the different standards, with the direction of different stakeholders, different organizations, that the web is gonna get better. And but by that I don't mean certain iterations of the web or like cryptocurrency or whatever. The web as a platform, web as an information is gonna get more accessible. It's gonna be easier to internationalize because it has no options. It is everywhere, and it's basically the medium of sharing information. I feel that, I mean, if you're playing on a PlayStation, you're playing video games, but outside the interface is all web, right? And then now with Steam Decks, you have that. So when it comes to interfaces, when it comes to information, most of that in one way or another is going through the web. And because as more people start connecting to the internet, as more people start accessing and demanding data and creating information and content, the web will have to become more equitable and sort of more open in ways. One example of that is in terms of temporal. Like so far, you could only think on the web in terms of times and dates in the Gregorian calendar. That would very soon no longer be a limitation. But also, who knows, like maybe we'll go to other planets and shit. So the web has to evolve because
it's true, like we don't know. Maybe we have toasters running on React. But
aren't they already? I think somebody posted the other day some toaster that was running like this tiny interface. It was written in Vue or something like.
But
it happens.
Like there was also the post about web components and the SpaceX shuttle.
Oh really? Yeah.
For the navigator, that was also wild.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people use the web. It's insane, and I think actually also like PlayStation UI for at least a part is React, and I know that some game, I think it was like Modern Warfare or something, also uses React, which is crazy. Cool, thank you so much for being here, Ujjwal. I still have one question for you, but it's a very simple one. Where can people follow you?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I don't know really. Like, I hope not on the street, but I try to go on various events and conferences all over, and basically anywhere on the internet. you see the nickname Reisekuchen, which I probably put somewhere.
Yeah, we have it in our descriptions. Don't worry. Yeah.
So that's who I am. I would like to say that I'm on Twitter /X, but not really. I think that's something that has changed recently, but for the better for my mental health. I try to be on Mastodon on different sort of servers, but not as much. But yeah, like if you're on Mastodon social or just I don't know somewhere Instagram, you can find me. But mostly just talking on events.
Okay, awesome. Good to know. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a real fun episode. I think that Aymen really hard agrees because he's a real TC39 fanatic. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's continued love. Thank you both for hosting.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And for the audience, we will be posting the different links for the different proposals in our notes for the episode. So check them out. Check the proposals. They will change your life. And TC39 rules.
Oh, also, Aymen,
Thank you,
I
everyone.
think we should
Yes.
still plug something. We didn't mention React Paris at all. And actually,
yeah.
our CFP is open. So now, if you, maybe Ujjwal, maybe even you, if you want to come to speak in Paris, I think it's 24 March out of the top of my head.
22nd.
22nd, there we go. 22nd of March in 2024. You can be there as well. We still have open CFP, so please submit something if you want to speak about something. I think that's all for
and
us.
Speaking about the CFPs, we also have 4 more days for our CFP for FOSDEM open. Looking at you, Ujjwal.
I already filled it.
You already filled it in. That's cool. So yeah, if you want to speak at one of the biggest open source conferences in Belgium, check out the
in the
CFP.
world.
We will also put the links to our notes. Thank you, everyone. Thank
Awesome.
you, Elian and Ujjwal. See you. Bye.
See you.
Bye.